Panama City Comic-Con. Welcome. Give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you so much. Hello.
Right,
Thank you so much. If you're an educator, can you please raise your hand?
Okay.
We gonna clap for you.
For real.
Thank you so much for all that you do.
If you don't know that you're an educator, you are. Trust.
Yes, facts. I'm an educator.
Yes, you are. I don't know why you didn't raise your hand.
I don't know why I didn't. I'm an educator. We're absolutely going to introduce ourselves in a more dramatic fashion. But thank you all so much for coming to our panel, where we're going to talk about representation of Black heroes, not only across the multiverse of Marvel, but across the comic verse, because we didn't want to just stop at Marvel.
That's right.
We are here trying to spread knowledge about all the things. And so the first thing that we're going to do, one, I want to just set the tone also that this is a community conversation. Mm-hmm. So if at any point you have a question, comment, something that is on your spirit that you would like to share, you do not have to wait to the end. We will get through what we need to get through, and I know everybody has talked at more than enough. And so at any point, if you have something to say, there's a microphone here. I think there are handheld mics too. Somebody can Vanna White them things, okay? And so without further ado, we will introduce ourselves, and I will start with my esteemed co-panelists.
Oh, it's my turn?
Yes.
Oh, hello everybody. I'm Victor Dandridge, lovingly called the hardest working man in comics. I'm a self-publishing comic creator, through my imprint Vantage and House Productions, born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. I'm a phenomenological narratologist through my You Create Comics line that tries to bridge the gap between comics and the classroom. Super excited to be here to chat with you guys today, and it's now my co-host's turn to introduce herself. What up, though?
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Vanessa Hintz. I use she, her pronouns, and my government job title is licensed clinical psychologist. Mm-hmm. I am also a college professor, so I too am an educator, as well as a pop culture enthusiast and a podcast host. I'm going to say that about 10 times throughout the course of this. My podcast is called About That.
That's right.
And so if you love anything that you hear, I have stuff up here. If you want some swag, if you want to subscribe to the podcast, it's amazing. We have conversations like this all the time. I've had Victor on more than anyone else in my life because we just have, and we have really, really, really great conversations. Like I am hoping we have today with you all. I will say at the outset, it's going to be a little bit heavy because when we talk about Blackness, we can't talk about Blackness without talking about race and racism. And that's going to be a little bit heavy at the start. So I just want to acknowledge that. And we'll talk a little bit about what it might feel like in the space and how I invite us all to engage in those feelings. And we're going to use whatever those feelings are to continue on in the conversation and talk about these different heroes that we can use to help people form racial identities or their own sort of positive racial identity, as well as to help with healing and development, generally speaking. Does that sound good to all of you?
Can we get some snaps? Yes? That's what I'm talking about. It is this last day of Black History Month, so we're going to represent
this the bonus
in the best
Black History
way.
Month day.
Listen.
Come on with
it. We out here.
Y'all did that on purpose. I know y'all speaking this up.
Oh, we already got a question.
Yes.
Are you related to Jordan? Microphone so everyone can hear it? That's why I grabbed it. Sorry, this is really good. Are you related to Dorothy Dandridge?
She was my great-great-aunt. Yes,
No
yes.
way.
So for those that don't know, Dorothy Dandridge was a phenomenal actress in the 1940s, worked with Belafonte a lot, and broke down a lot of walls for Black actors and actresses. So yes, she's my great-great-aunt. So yes. So I have a name to live up to, and I be striving for it all the time.
First of all, I was today years old when
Stop,
I learned that.
are you
Like, why
serious?
would you do that?
What you
in
mean?
front of all these people? Why
We've
would you
never
just
talked
tell me
about
that?
this?
I was today years old.
My bad.
It's fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. Everything's fine.
So
I'm just gonna sit over here.
True.
It's gonna be fine. And so as I referenced, some of what we talk about at the outset as we're sort of setting the context can be a little bit heavy. I don't think that heavy is bad. I think heavy is heavy, right? And so I'm going to invite us on. This is actually taken from a field guide that is typically used in K through 12 education, Courageous Conversations About Race by Glenn Singleton. And so I'm just going to ask us all to lean into these things. These are not rules for engaging in the space. These are just agreements that we have about how we will engage with one another today. And the first is to stay engaged, whatever that looks like for you. There's no right or wrong way to be. How you are is how you are. And so I invite you to stay engaged in a way that is most aligned and authentic to you. I also invite folks to experience discomfort. Discomfort is a precursor for change. It's absolutely necessary. What I or Victor never invite is for anybody to feel harmed. Harm is not conducive to anything. Harm is harm, and it is horrible. And so if there's anything that we say, anything that is said in this space that you feel harmed by, I invite you to call me into that because I absolutely want to remain open to learning and growing. And I say call in intentionally, not call out, but call in, call people up. And so I invite us all to experience discomfort. However you feel, I just invite you to lean into that. And I'm like a whole professional. And so if anybody needs to talk about anything, that's what I do. I'm a professional. I also invite us to expect and accept non-closure. 1 hour of conversation about race, about Blackness, is not going to change anything. It's an hour of a conversation, right? So you'll likely leave this space with more questions than answers. You might likely leave this space feeling unsettled, and that's okay.
Right.
And I invite everybody to just expect that so that when you leave, you don't feel frustrated. You might still feel frustrated, as I do many a time. And so I just invite you to expect and accept that it is what it is, and we have a lot of work to do. And then lastly, to speak your truth. You are one of one. There's no one else in this world that has had your experiences, and your truth is yours. Your truth is your own. It's not my job or Victor's job or anybody's job to tell you that your truth is inaccurate. It's our job to offer perspectives, and that's what I invite everybody to do. Your truth is a perspective. And so does everybody feel good about those things and engaging in the space in that way today?
Absolutely.
Can we get some stuff?
Yeah. You know what, the thing I love about what you set this up to be is, as much as this is dedicated to educators, this is also putting us in a framework that we're all learners. And I think that's the most important thing, is that even as educators, there's still an opportunity for us to learn things, whether that is on the go, in the classroom, and beyond. I think that's a huge, huge opportunity. So I hope everyone kind of embraces that truth as well. It is meant for educators, but we are all learners, and that's what the whole context of this is about.
Facts. And we have been talking about Black Panther, Wakanda in some way, shape, or form for almost
Since
4 years now. Like for 4 years now. And every time we do this,
Something
every time we
different.
do one of these, I learn something.
Yeah.
There's some other thing that comes to me. I'm moved in my spirit some kind of way. So
That's right.
I invite you all to, again, whatever you feel in this space, happy, sad, mad, glad, emotions are not good or bad. They just are.
That's right.
And so I invite you to lean into whatever that is for you. All right, this is my little flex picture.
Go ahead.
Last
Show
year
it
at
off.
C2E2,
Show
when
it
I
off.
had met Namor and stuff, he was there and I had touched him and it was great.
Now, y'all don't understand. She didn't wash that shirt for
I didn't.
She still hasn't. Let me
I
be honest.
didn't. And he winked at me, and it's like a memory.
That's
It's
right.
like-
That's right.
It was so great. So what I'm going to do initially is, again, sort of set the context, and then we're going to move into talking more specifically about different characters and different narratives, including Victor's own narratives that he's published through his imprint. But again, this is the part that I think is going to be a little bit heavy, and albeit uncomfortable for folks. We're just gonna. Ooh, I spelled that word wrong.
We're not
just
gonna
gonna
talk
set that. We're gonna set the stage. I'm gonna think about that for 5 years.
I know you are, but this
For
is a
5
learning
years,
space. It's a
the
learning
fact that I
space. Stop
said
it.
that word wrong. Let's just go to the next slide. So first, we're gonna talk a little bit about racialized trauma and what that is, what that looks like, very briefly. Again, just to set a context that I think is going to establish a basis for us to have a conversation about healing. Because what I want people to understand about racial trauma, racialized discrimination, is that you don't have to do anything for it to happen to you. It just is. And so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit here at the outset. So this is a graph image that I use when I do all kinds of trainings with educators, with clinicians, with my own students. I teach students who are in the process of becoming licensed professional counselors. And so when we think about how racial trauma manifests, it starts in a very sort of, I don't want to call it benign, but it's kind of like death by 1,000 paper cuts, right?
Yes.
So has anybody not heard the term microaggression? Is anybody unfamiliar with this term? Well, I'm going to tell you what it is anyway. So a microaggression, what I want to say at the outset is micro in this case does not mean small.
Right.
It doesn't mean insignificant. Micro, in the case of microaggressions, mean it happens on the micro level of interaction, so person to person. So microaggressions happen in the context of relationships, and what they are these everyday slights that communicate negative stereotypes, derogatory ideas about people of a certain identity group. So racialized microaggressions communicate derogatory thoughts about people because of a specific identity group. Case in point, and I'm sure you have heard this one over and over and over.
Well, go for it.
You're so articulate.
What? What do you mean? The
Vanessa,
words
you
that I
sound
use?
so smart.
Right.
Like I don't have a whole doctorate degree. Why are you surprised that I sound smart?
Right.
And again, when you start to follow that thread and you ask people questions, they get real racist real quick. And so microaggressions are, again, things that this is the most common form of discrimination, whether we're talking about person to person, like you just out and about in your everyday. In the classroom, this is the most common form of discrimination for students of color. I read a study that in Washington, D.C., they surveyed Black high school students. At least 5 microaggressions per day is what they experience
Minimum.
in high school.
Minimum.
And it's not just because they're aware of it. Children as young as preschool age are aware that they're treated differently as well. So this is what we mean by microaggressions. And those are the things that, again, in the sort of grand scheme of things can seem insignificant, like somebody trying to touch your hair, somebody asking me, is this a weave? Like those things can seem insignificant, but when they happen over and over and over and over again, it gets real turned up real
Absolutely.
quick. It gets real turned up.
In the classroom, there is such a vapid opportunity for this to happen. Just earlier this school year, my daughter goes to an international school. So you have students from all over that are there, and there was a substitute teacher that stated that they can only pronounce American names. Steve, John, things like that. Now, when you have a community of people who
Are those American?
Right? Like, like literally stated this to the student body, and my daughter came home and told me about it. I'm like, and I'm on my way to the school. Because, again, that is unto itself a microaggression. To say that your name is impronounceable to my Western tongue, that is a microaggression. And you'd be surprised how often such a thing is exhibited in educational spaces. Yes.
This actually often happens in private schools that have a lot of,
No, you all
No, of
good.
course.
I can't hear. It's for me, too, because I can't hear.
This happens a lot in private academies or private schools where they will accept international students in the tuition that the international students, which is like triple the amount of regular tuition.
Right.
And then they make them change their names, and they only let them speak English. Sorry, it's kind of went off.
It's
Yeah,
all
no.
You good.
So yeah, it's even, especially in private academies, it can be even worse when the government doesn't step in.
Right.
They're not allowed to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm.
So the scale of microaggression can be overt, subvert, like all of it. Yes.
It's not just in private academies. I went to public school my whole life.
Mhm.
And I knew that when they got down to the D's, I would just say, yeah, that's me.
Mm-hmm.
You don't,
Mhm.
please stop trying to butcher my name.
Yeah.
You're not even going to try to ask me how to say it.
Oh, that's a big one.
It's de la dalat. Yeah, that's just
Mhm.
It's de la peña. De la peña.
De La Pena.
Okay.
I like it. I like it.
And yeah, it's been that way my whole life, and 20 years in the Army. I put it up.
Wow.
And from a very young age, you learn that your comfort is not more important than the person in power. So like the teacher's comfort, like I need to be able to say these names.
Right.
So I know that your parents gave you that name. I know that that is who you are, but I don't need to learn how to say it because I got stuff to do. And so from a very young age, people who are marginalized, whether we're talking about people of color, queer students, students with disabilities, what have you, you learn that your well-being does not matter, right? And what you learn to do, and this is the sort of second piece of this cycle as we move clockwise. I promise I have a doctorate. People learn how to cope with it, like you just mentioned. You just learn. You're like, yep, that's me. You just learn how to deal with it because if not, you would be angry all the time. You would literally be angry, be ready to fight. As someone who has matriculated higher education and is now in academia, that is the state of what it means to be a black person in academia. Like every day, I think I'm gonna have to fight somebody. And so you learn just how to deal with it, right? So you learn to adaptively cope. Example, when we all went into lockdown during COVID, initially it was like, yeah, I'm about to do all this stuff. I'm gonna paint the shed, I'm gonna build this bread, I'm gonna do my art. And it's like, yeah, this is so tight. We got all this stuff to do. After about a month, we sick of that now. We need to go back outside, right? And so adaptive coping mechanisms become exhausted. Like what used to work for me, when people say you're so articulate or I want to touch your hair, or, oh my gosh, like I'm happy you made it out the hood, whatever they say, right? Like you learn to deal with it, but there is inevitably a point where it's like that's it. We done now. And so You exhaust your adaptive coping mechanisms, and what you then experience is what we refer to as race-based stress. So race-based stress is different from other types of stress because no amount of coping makes it go away. Because racism is as American as apple pie.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? And so race-based stress then over time, and I want to also acknowledge that this is a cycle that someone can experience. It doesn't mean that everybody experiences this cycle. I want to make that note, right? Because there are different things, which is what we're going to talk about as we move through the presentation, that we can do to intercept people at different points of this cycle. But over time, race-based stress becomes racialized trauma, and racialized trauma lives in our DNA. It lives in our psyche. It lives in our communities. It lives in our relationships. So stress is something that, maybe I can manage this. Trauma is something that is so insidious and so infused into every aspect of your life that, again, just being who you are is a task every single day. Moving through a world that doesn't value you is a task. Mm-hmm. And that's racialized trauma. Yes?
Clark Kent, yes.
You better get them steps. You get them steps.
I was curious, because you mentioned in your DNA, but also, so would you draw a line between material conditions that come from, like being born in a zip code that was redlined, being the descendant of slaves, so you didn't have money, so you couldn't, that kind of thing, material versus, everyday stressors, dealing with microaggressions every day, dealing with run-of-the-mill racism from employers, that kind of thing. Would you say that there's a difference between those two, or would those both fall under racial trauma?
I would definitely say they both fall under racial trauma, specifically as a racial stressor, whereas if you think about somebody that is undergoing stress and it's causing a medical issue, and the doctor says, well, stop doing the thing that causes you stress. On a racial-based issue, you can't stop being the race. And so both of them have that sort of linear connection of whether it's redlining, because that's something you can't get away from, versus the microaggressions that are, constantly poking at you. Because you can't put down your racial identity, that's always going to be something that's going to connect them, because they're all going to be the same sort of source point.
Gotcha.
I would also say that they're absolutely different, but when we talk about different, we talk about it this way, not this way. So it's not better or worse, it's just different. Because we're not out here trying to play the oppression Olympics, because oppression is horrible.
Come on.
And so I think that those, to your point, so you said something that really struck a chord in me. Racism is not about people of color. Racism is about white people. So racism, and when I say it's about white people, I mean it's about systems of whiteness, right? Like, it's not about people. If we took all the white people, right, and we were like, you go over there, we still won't have racism, because racism is about a system. It's about laws. It's about, again, the way that it is baked into our world. And so I think that when you think about race-based stress or racialized trauma, whatever it is, it's out of your control.
Right.
As a person of color, as a marginalized person, any ism we think about is out of my control. It's in the hands of the people empowered to make change, and that clearly has not happened in 400 years, 500 years.
Facts.
It can. It just hasn't happened
Not
yet.
Not yet.
And so the other thing that I would say about racialized trauma and race-based stress that is different than other types of trauma and other types of stress is this sort of historical factor, right? And so I talked about trauma being something that is baked into our DNA. It is biological, it is psychological, it is social, it is spiritual. Research has shown that the descendants of enslaved Africans, the descendants of survivors of the Holocaust, the descendants of Native peoples who experienced genocide, that is in our DNA. In addition to that, there are patterns of behavior that we engage in that are absolutely rooted in those traumas of the past. Case in point, I am a biracial black woman. My mom is white and my dad is black. My dad, obviously, is the descendant of enslaved Africans, as am I. Nothing I do is ever good enough. Nothing I do is ever good. I'm a whole doctor, the first doctor in our whole family, a whole doctor. Is he proud? Yes, but there's always something else. That arguably can be drawn back to the times of enslavement, where parents had to devalue their children's attributes or else they would be sold.
Right.
They wouldn't be there with them anymore, right? So I'm not going to talk about how proud I am of you, because if I do that, somebody's going to take you away from me. If I am loud and proud about what it is that you're doing, something bad is going to happen. And I would argue that when we see parents who have experienced racialized trauma that are hard on their kids, that is absolutely internalized intergenerational trauma. That is internalized racism, right? Sometimes there's also some other stuff too. Right. And we cannot negate this factor. We cannot negate this piece of it.
Do we have any comic book fans in the room? Excellent. So what
Everyone.
I love that. Because one of the things I think is also important is when you say things like, race-based trauma, intergenerational trauma, you almost think of it like, oh, this is a circumstance. How could this be ingrained in DNA? It's evolution. If you think about the X-Men, this is kind of an evolutionary response to outside stimulus that has sparked these different individual chromosomes to activate and give these people powers. Sometimes these powers are good, sometimes these powers are detrimental, sometimes these powers are things that are negligible and people don't even know. That is the way that intergenerational trauma works, is that it has this spectrum of opportunity to affect people. Sometimes it is something super deep-rooted and hard to overcome, and sometimes it's something that you go, it's cool, I can deal with it, not a problem. That's the range of it. And so again, if you've ever felt something like that, even if it wasn't at a high-key level, it's not necessarily that it's not happening to you, just that your evolutionary response to it is able to be more adjusted than what it might be for someone else. That also is to say that someone else that's dealing with it and reacting highly is not overreacting. That is where they are with their trauma.
Yes.
I got you.
There's an amazing book. It's called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy. And if you are anyone who works with Black youth, I absolutely think you need to read it. But one, she talks about these different patterns of behavior that are, she argues, a result of intergenerational trauma as a result of enslavement. And one of those patterns of behavior is ever-present anger. Of course I'm mad because we've been dealing with the same, I almost said a cuss.
Forever.
We've been dealing with it since 1619.
Right.
And no matter what we do, we had a whole black president and everybody was like, ooh, okay, we made it. No. So anger is ever present because what else can we do? Right? And so again, when we, and I invite particularly people who work with youth to think about that child that is tantruming or that is oppositional. I hate that word. That is oppositional. Think about all the stuff they're carrying just because of the way that they look or what they're dealing with, right? And so when we talk about intergenerational trauma, sometimes, again, that stuff was in our chromosome. We ain't had nothing to do with that, right? And the last thing I'll sort of say about this before we transition into something that I don't remember what's next. Yes, please, yes.
I feel like I'm cheating several scenarios now, but I do want to know when you say oppositional, that from a mental health perspective, what we often see happen is that if you have like a 7-year-old boy who has a lot of like, active behaviors, a lot of outbursts, if they're white, if ADHD, if they're black, you're oppositional.
Yep.
Bloop.
Yep. Come on now.
Bloop.
Read it.
You said the quiet part out loud.
Yes.
You said the quiet part out loud.
Yes.
That's a whole other 2-hour conversation about disproportionate discipline practices in K through 12 education. We're going to do that next year.
That's right. We're going to go ahead and submit that at the end of this.
Man,
Don't worry about it.
Go ahead and invite us back. So, again, the other thing that I would say about that it's important to understand about race-based trauma, race-based stress, other identity-based discrimination versus what we typically think of as PTSD, right? PTSD is something that oftentimes has a very discrete event. So you witness something, you experience something, there's a discrete trauma. Racism is a chronic trauma. Sexism, transphobia, homophobia, these are chronic traumas that don't often get understood like PTSD type traumas. And so the things that I think we sort of alluded to some of these that it's important to understand about the differences is that one, with racism, it don't even have to happen to me. And it affects me, right? We all remember what the summer of 2020 was like. I have never, nor will I ever, watch the video of George Floyd being murdered. I do not want to see that. It was traumatizing enough knowing that happened. Right. It was traumatizing enough seeing his face, right? It's traumatizing enough to have to say people's names so that they're not forgotten. I didn't know them people, but it absolutely affected me. I would argue it absolutely affected you too, right? And so I think it's important to understand that racialized trauma can be and often is vicarious. It's also important to understand that no amount of coping is going to make it go away. I can go to all the mountain yoga retreats I want to, and I'll feel good until I come back, and I'm slapped right back in the face with all of this inequity.
Can we talk about why PTSD is categorized and determined as it is? Most notably, I think, was a phrase coined post the Desert Storm, which mostly affected military, but cis hetero white men. Yeah. And thus it was given a name and determination of severity because of the demographic that it seemingly affected most often. And so when you look at that context of how, again, whiteness becomes this shield for conversation and determinations for some people as a protective, but then a detriment to others, this is that at play. Like right here in the terminologies that we use on a regular basis, this is what that does. This is why it's built that way. Yes?
I also like there's a distinction, too, between PTSD, which is often...
Yeah, I see you. I
Made
see
that
you.
happen.
I see you.
That's what I'm talking about.
Maybe I'm off hard on this one. I feel like PTSD is often a thing too that's done, and it happens to people from battlefield situations, from like someone attacking them in relations, things that are broadly considered to be outside of the norm, that are breakages of normal society. Whereas racial trauma can happen. I mean, redlining was a thing that happened. Microaggressions are a thing that happened. They're frowned upon, but the fact that people of color get worse medical treatment, get less job opportunities, those are things that we're allowed to waffle about and are like, oh, we should do this, but it's not as strongly socially disincentivized. There's sort of an allowance, it seems to me, in racial trauma versus things that cause PTSD.
Absolutely, because you have, like you said, the basis of PTSD is the basis of there's battle and attacks, and you see that as outside the norm. Whereas for racial trauma, it's not outside the norm, it is the norm. And that's what kind of devalues it in the overall statement, which is very, very true.
Yeah. I actually think one of the earlier, just a really good phrase that I liked a lot, when you were talking about like just having to live with the suffering. It's a permanent level of acceptable suffering. It's whenever it's like, oh, well, I don't like to, can't we have trigger warnings because it might trigger me? And then someone says, can't you just have your panic attack about it? Why
Just
do
have
you
it.
have to trigger warnings when you could just have your panic attack, which would mean you suffer, but the other 4 of us in this room don't suffer? Like, can't you just suffer? Can't you just take this night
For us.
Right. Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so
Let's go.
Let's go. Y'all didn't know Michael Bay Jordan.
Is that what the B stands for?
He had played Killmonger. And one thing that I'll say about Killmonger, and I'm sorry if anybody in this room hasn't seen these 2 films.
Just can we coin that?
Spoiler alert!
Has anyone not seen Black Panther or Wakanda Forever?
That's the first time to say.
Okay, all right, that's all right.
Sorry,
We're gonna
spoiler
get into some
alert.
things. All right.
I think what I want to say about Killmonger just initially is he shows up, I think, in both films to remind folks of racialized trauma. I think that he comes into the throne room and he says, I want the throne. You do not understand how hard my life is and so many other black people's lives are, and y'all just sitting up here like it's cool. Y'all cute, that's cool. And then when Shuri is having her situation, I don't want to say too much, but when she's having her situation, he again reminds her. And so I think that's why for so many, not just black people, but for so many people watching Black Panther, it's like, he ain't lying.
He ain't wrong.
Yeah, he had a point.
He might not be right, but he ain't wrong.
Then he started doing stuff, and it's like, sir, you can't do that. But he had a point. Like, he wasn't wrong.
But was he speaking with the voice of oppression because that's what he learned?
Bloop.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Bloop.
Go ahead.
And I would say one thing that I appreciate, again, about Killmonger is, again, to the point that you just made, as someone who often, particularly for educators, but also mental health professionals, we want to adopt a trauma-informed perspective. Nothing that he was saying didn't make sense. Just like Thanos, but that's a different conversation. Nothing that he was saying didn't make sense, right? But I think for so many people, there's a reason that Black Panther made $1 billion.
Come on now.
There's a reason that people saw it 10 times in the theaters, because it spoke to them. Because he was speaking to people and speaking to the experiences that they had. I don't know what it's like to be a prince or a princess of a sovereign African nation. I do know what it's like to be black in America.
Come on.
Bloop,
Yeah.
bloop. Colonize what?
Yeah.
What would you like to say about Killmonger?
So one of the things that I will say about Killmonger is that in the most ironic way of this movie, he is borderline the hero. Everything that he says is true. And his words are what actually catapult T'Challa and the whole nation of Wakanda to move forward to a more integrated space to the rest of the world. Now, we have had the conversation that the irony of it here is that there are female characters within this movie that say the same thing and get ignored. We ain't even going to talk about the fact that Nakia is the one who says it to T'Challa.
At the beginning.
But it's Shuri that he shows it off to as though women are interchangeable and you can just say, oh, I told a lady and it's the same. It's not. But the idea here is that in his aggression, Killmonger actually gives truth. And a lot of times, this is one of the things that when it comes to racial traumas and the responses that people have to it, they're not prepared for. When the idea is you did this. Now, is it a specific personalized you? No, but if you are a part of a system and have benefited from said system, the you-ness is not necessarily missing the mark. Just like he is saying that the whole nation of Wakanda is responsible for allowing this trauma to happen to other melanated people because you did not intervene. Is it you specifically, T'Challa, who made that decision? No. But you have benefited much in the same way of privilege as others in that way. So that's what he's clapping back at and represents perfectly in this movie.
Come on.
Both of them, actually.
Come on.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the movie, when he goes to the dreamscape for the second time, he repudiates all of Kings, saying, all of you did this.
All of you.
Literally, sorry, thank you. Literally the line of Kings.
That's all right. That's all right.
Okay. Yeah, literally, like, it was the perfect target. Like, the line of Kings, you going back since the founding of Wakanda,
That's right.
you allowed this to happen.
All of you were wrong.
He didn't say it to some common person
Right.
who had no power. He said it to the ruling class.
That's right.
Yeah. So
Yes.
it was the perfect target.
Yeah. Again, motivated by Killmonger's, presence. He told truth, and it was enough to move a king to speak to other kings of that truth.
And I think this is, oh yes, there's a hand over here.
I was just scratching.
Oh,
No, yeah.
Hello.
hello.
I guess my question, do you ever get fatigued as a POC who's reading comics that sometimes they too often fall into these negative tropes where Black Panther is definitely one of the better examples, but I don't know if you guys saw it, but what if Miles Morales became Thor and had the hammer with graffiti on it?
Yes.
By Odin's beard.
I'm sorry, what?
Yes, this happened.
Yeah.
This did happen.
We gonna talk about mine. Ooh,
We are gonna talk about mine.
Almost opt for sometimes race swap characters because the big name of Watchmen, we have the Watchmen series, and that big name attached to that is sometimes given more attention than say your Black Panthers, your Static Shocks, those type of things. I feel like those people do stereotypes a lot.
So to speak on that, I will first make the claim, a Black creator is what I am, not who I am. I specifically aim to make stories that I think could be universal, despite whether the main characters are melanated, POC, BIPOC, or whatever. However, there are things where when the context of Black characters is brought up, there always does seem to be this need for internal opposition. It's one of the things that I have lamented the most about most Black Panther solo series. When you have Black Panther in the general Marvel Comics context, he is a person from Wakanda that showcases this vastness of technological advance and his place in the rest of the world. But when you have a Black Panther comic book, it's always internal strife, as though for whatever reason we cannot actually get along. It is a front that we present to the rest of the world. That becomes exhausting. Specifically Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is a phenomenal philosopher, writer, and everything, but the core of what he started with his run of Black Panther in a modern context was that the people of Wakanda aren't happy with the king. Why? What reason do you have to not be happy? What ailment have you had as a society? What unjust have you felt, being that you are this uncolonized, very well protected, sovereign nation that does not have the same effects of blackness that the rest of the world has? Why are you mad? It's a narrative piece, and unfortunately, it is a common piece that when Black characters are given the opportunity to exist, they are often shown to be antagonistic to each other. Yeah.
I mean, there's sort of an argument to be made that people are always going to be tribalists. That you could have. I don't think it's entirely unreasonable that people could live in a really nice society. I mean, London looks pretty cool to live in, but invariably there are people who don't like the way things are. And
Right.
every society on Earth, there are people who look at that society and says, "I think this society should be different."
Sure.
So that, I don't think it's entirely unreasonable. Admittedly, you might have people who are the bad guys who want bad things to happen, but the point is that they want things to be different.
So here's the pushback to that. In the first Black Panther movie, when we first see T'Challa in action as Black Panther, when he drops from the plane, the people that he's attacking are other Africans, but not Wakandans. And the idea that there are other people in terms of tribalism that you could affect, absolutely. You can have that conversation that there are people that through their own perspectives have an issue with Wakanda. That's fine. But Wakanda itself should not always be shown as the center of turmoil unto itself as opposed to in opposition to other people. Because the idea of what Wakanda is supposed to be is a utopia. Why do you have to tell stories that break down the utopia in order for the stories to be beneficial in the Black Panther mythos when you have other places that they could, like literally how many countries are there in Africa that you can have Black Panther go to that go, I think we should change something here, or we should have some effect here. And maybe those people don't like the Wakandans' presence. Why is it always that the Wakandans have to eat themselves from the inside out to tell narratives? They shouldn't. Not always. It's fun if it's once in a while, but not always.
Yeah, I mean, the entire point of M'Baku, is that he wants to run Wakanda his way. Both of the movies and the comics are different, but
Right.
He's another agent who wants to run things differently. But that is another example of tribalism of like, you run things this way, I want to run things this way. Totally reasonable.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you have a hand there? In
Yeah,
the
two
white
of them.
white shirt?
Yeah.
And then we'll come up
I
here.
guess I just wanted to add, one more thing about that conversation. I think their relationship at its core was kind of an analogy for a class struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And so, his experience as a Black man is completely different to T'Challa's experience as a Black man. And so it was almost, just purely on that, difference of class, right? Like, we're still, brothers in that sense. Like, we are of the same race, but there's this thing that we can't fix, right? Our class difference.
And I'm just gonna say something. I don't get no kickbacks from this, but there's a book. It's called Black Panther Psychology: Hidden Kingdoms. I wrote a chapter in that book about what you just said.
Yep.
And so if anybody want to read it and then hit me up, I don't get money for it because that's a different conversation.
I mean-
but y'all should read it. Y'all should. Go ahead.
We're going to talk about that.
No worries. I was just coming to the whole conversation about how just showing the strife and that's the only way to relate because when we think of mass media here in America, it's what's digestible for white folk.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the only way they see us sometimes.
Come on now. Come on
You
now.
better just come on.
Yes.
So that's just one of the things I did want to bring it back to that because it's unfortunate since BLM started, everything like that. I was getting into college, it's all about our strife and people want to see I don't know, they want to make it not heroicism, but pedestal-esque. I don't even know what that means. But
Yes.
it's just a weird
It's
Yes.
very real. Very real.
No, you good.
But again, this is one of the contexts of why this movie is so great. There's so many layers to it.
I was just wondering if that was only common in America, that idea that Black people have to write so that it's consumed, right? That's sort of novel. That's consumable by white people. I was wondering if it's the same for African authors as well.
So, in terms of African authors in American comic spaces, do you mean? I would be remiss to try to say globally this is always true. I can speak to very specific instances, in American comics, it tends to be the truth, to the point where there was a Shuri series that was openly promoting the idea of intergenerational workings together, collaboration of Black women. And when she couldn't figure out a problem, she called Tony Stark. And there's something to that where you go, the whole narrative said the opposite of what this was supposed to be, but because of the placement of American comics and corporation that's in control, and Iron Man it's necessary to make him kind of a pivotal figure in Marvel Comics, you still default to him, despite the fact that the narrative itself that was being weaved or woven says otherwise. So there's a lot to that.
My bad. I'll say one thing and then we'll get to your comment. Because I think you raised an excellent point about the experiences of being Black as an African American versus an African versus somebody from the Caribbean. Those are all different.
Yeah.
And anti-Blackness is global.
Right.
Anti-Blackness is global. White supremacy is global. And so I think that is because I think there was a lot of conversation about who they got to play certain characters in the film, and the differences between how Black Africans experience the film versus African Americans. And again, we're not putting it here because anti-Blackness is global,
Yes.
right? And so I think that it is not far-fetched to, think about what that looks like in all of those different contexts throughout the diaspora.
Yeah.
I just feel like I gotta say, in all fairness, in the time he coaches Black Panther, the reason why people were not happy with T'Challa wasn't because Wakanda is a nation of malcontents.
True.
It's because he rendered the great mound inert to save it from Dr. Doom appropriating it. And,
Dr. Doom. Doom
and because he got a lot of smoke for Namor's attack on Wakanda that killed millions.
So to that end, and respectfully on this one, and it's not even necessarily like I don't want to say that this was the reason why this was written this way, but it is T'Challa taking the heat for two non-black characters and their efforts to demean and diminish Wakanda, and he's the one that's getting attacked by his own people for their efforts. Like, the idea of what he's doing, they can't see the value of unto themselves. There's such a materialistic vibe for the vibranium that him to make it inert so that this person can't exploit it is now a problem that he did that. But I'm literally doing something that will keep us out of the colonizer's view. Like, that is literally why I'm doing it, for your benefit, and yet you are mad at me. This becomes a part of a very regular conversation with African Americans and government powers. When we had, President Barack Obama, it was, what did he do for the black community? Well, he's president of the United States, not just black people. So, you have to have a different context for it. Again, these are things that through experience and racial trauma, all these different things, we'll read in a different context. And so me as an African American, I can't help but be like, okay, so Namor, who, despite the fact that he's presented as brown skin in the movies, isn't really shown that way in the comics. So you have a non-BIPOC. Say what?
Because he isn't it.
Right. And so, the idea of these non-black, non-African people inflicting their intentions on Wakanda, and T'Challa is the one who's blamed for what they did, is kind of that same idea. It's why is he the one that's to blame? As though everyone in Wakanda isn't aware of who he's fighting against. They definitely are. They should know.
But at the same time, isn't that a very human and sort of true thing about human nature? Is that people will mostly just is that you can do your best and still be
perhaps.
I don't think you can really say that's racially coded, because the same thing happens to Spider-Man every day.
The difference, of course, is that Peter's grown up in Queens and not in a specific technological utopia. The idea of the technology elevating the society means that the people shouldn't respond like the other colonized surviving people of the world. They shouldn't have the same response. They should be elevated because they haven't had the same trauma systems that kind of engendered what they're supposed to do. So that idea doesn't quite work when you look at they are specifically supposed to be something removed from that same sort of scenarios. That's not human. That's trained. That's the idea, is that what they are doing should not be the same as what everybody else because their experience has been different. That's evolution.
Well, the thing that Priest said about his approach to Black Panther, and I'm going to hand over the mic after this.
Yeah.
I don't own this whole panel, but he said that his approach to Wakandans is that, and it was very Priest the way he put it. He said maybe they're not very nice. I mean, these were his exact words. I mean, they're nice in that they give you a cookie, but they're not nice in that they, as a high tech and sophisticated and luxurious as their civilization is, maybe they sort of look down on other African nations, and maybe if you want to look at it, maybe there's maybe the fact that they're sort of petulant about the fact that their vaunted king has not been able to prevent everything terrible from happening, and instead of appreciating how hard he's working, they're mad for it.
Well, be careful.
The dark side.
You're covering nearly 20 years of storytelling, from Priest to Ta-Nehisi Coates. That's a long time. That concept wasn't established before Priest. So Priest making that idea of them looking down on people is what Killmonger's talking about. That's the concept. You live comfortably here while the rest of us struggled. So that's a different context for what the Dr. Doom's war story, Namor, and all that stuff. That's years later, and so that's people repeating a concept that what Christopher Priest, and again, definitely check out Christopher Priest's run. It is phenomenal.
He was Black Panther's Alan Moore.
Very much so. Very, very much so. It's very well said.
And his Black Panther was Moore's Swamp Thing for Black Panther.
That's a really good analogy. I like that. But no, he set up something that was a question mark because the other stories didn't quite look at the Wakandans in that way of looking at other people outside as though they're looking down on them. That was a different concept. So to marry the two as though they're one and the same, that wouldn't be correct.
But I just feel like if you're that sort of just going to look down on those outside, it's going to affect the way you look at those on the inside too, in some ways.
Again, being that we've never experienced a technological utopia like them, we could never know.
And I would say, too, as we transition into talking about, like, all of this is horrible, so what do we do, right? Like, racism is horrible, what do we do? I think to something that you mentioned, like, we don't necessarily identify anything as a racial matter, and we cannot remove the salience of race.
Right.
You cannot remove it, just like you can't, because of the way that our society is structured. So it may not be just because of race. Race is a factor. It's a factor because of the way that our society functions.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we transition into talking a little bit again about, like, okay, all of that was sad. What do we do? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about cultural humility, because understanding that isms happen, particularly racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, all these things happen in our world. What do we do about it? And to adopt a space of cultural humility is to understand that you're not going to get it right. Like, it's a constant assessment, trial and error process. What is okay to say today is not going to be okay to say tomorrow.
Truth.
And it's just something that if we are taking up the mantle to be humble, we're taking up the mantle to be lifelong learners, we're taking up the mantle to be told that, nah, fam, that is a trigger for me, or whatever, right? Like, we truly, if we are operating from a sense of humility, we're tolerating mistakes and we're taking risks. And so I think it's important for us to understand, particularly as we think about, like, working with young people and just working with people generally, that humility is what is necessary to make change. I'm going to skip forward through this because I really want to get to... Nope. Yes.
Hey, let's talk about it.
I really want to get to Miles before we have to go, friends, because, okay, I'm going to tell y'all a story right quick.
Do it.
So I did not watch Into the Spider-Verse until like a month ago.
Come on now.
Can I tell you?
Thank you. I just need y'all with me on that.
Can I say something right quick? Can I say something? Me and him was in Dallas in an Uber on the freeway. No, where was we at? We was somewhere. But when I told him that, he told me to get out. He told me to get out the car in the summer in Dallas on the freeway, right? And I will be honest, like, we've had conversations about why it took me so long. I think
we did.
Chadwick Boseman's death, it hit me very hard. Like, it was, I still can't watch Black Panther. It hit me very hard. And I was not ready to be vulnerable with another powerful Black character like that. I just wasn't, to be quite, if I'm being transparent. And everybody told me, like, Into the Spider-Verse is tight. And I was like, nope, I'm not ready to go there, because that gutted me when Chadwick Boseman passed. And it was just like it was just a mess, right? And when I finally did watch people, people,
who was right?
Forever changed, like forever changed. And so, Victor, why is Miles so special?
So the concept of Miles Morales as a legacy character, and I'm almost like I don't want to use that term. I was super hesitant for it because he has become something unto himself. Miles is not the first non-Peter Parker Spider-Man, right? That's very important to establish. He is not the first one. Whether you're considering Ben Reilly, whether you're considering 2099, like, he is not the first one that wasn't Peter Parker. However, he has struck a chord on a cultural level of representation in the idea that there are people that very much so consider themselves like Spider-Man. Whether you, if you go back, I mean, obviously Spider-Man was created in the 1960s, right? But there's a lot of aspects of the way he moves and things like that that have been evolved at a time where there are things that are representative, like, of dance, break dancing to be specific, which is an offshoot of hip hop, which is considered a very Black cultural art form. So there are aspects of Spider-Man that have always seemed Black. But Peter Parker isn't, right? He never was. And so Miles gets to be the Black Spider-Man that so many people have always considered and thought about. One of the things that I think is so amazing is the origin story of Miles Morales. Big shout out to Brian Michael Bendis, who is one of the guests here, who is one of the co-creators of Miles, along with Sarah Pacelli, the artist. Does everyone know how Miles Morales even came into conversation?
You should tell everyone.
Okay, I'll tell everyone. So what happened was Sony, who owns the movie rights to Spider-Man, was interested in doing a new Spider-Man franchise. This is post Tobey Maguire, but pre Andrew Garfield. And so they were trying to figure out what they were going to do. Donald Glover wanted to be in the running for playing Spider-Man. He's a fan. There's this famous thing in Community where you see him in the opening credits where he's waking up and he's wearing Spider-Man pajamas. My phone just died. It just happens. So he's campaigning. And there was this resounding response that you can't be Spider-Man because Peter Parker is white. Now, the clapback easily is, no, Peter Parker's not real. So you don't actually have to make that distinction. So when you look at Peter Parker, even as a character, what is it that has to be true? He has to be an orphan. He has to be from Queens, right? Maybe he's 16, maybe he's older, but there's nothing about his experience that says that he has to be white. And it was a problem. Like when that was presented, in context, it was like, well, wait, why haven't we actually had a non-white Peter Parker? Now, you can say 2099 is non-white, right? Miguel O'Hara is, obviously of Hispanic descent, but he's also half Irish, right? So there's this concept of, well, he's brownish, right? Not quite. Hispanic has a range in terms of ethnicity to somewhat kind of have included in whiteness into it, right? So there was this piece where you're like, well, let's play around with this. Let's do something. And in a very real sense, what's really amazing is that with Miles, he is a character that actually had his powers at the same time in the Ultimate Universe. It's very important. This is not the main Marvel U. The Ultimate Universe, the same time that universe's Peter Parker also had powers. But he didn't choose to become a superhero. Peter Parker did, Miles Morales did not. And Peter Parker in that universe died. And Miles felt responsible. I could have helped him. I have power. I wasn't interested in that responsibility. I'm a kid. I just wanted to be a kid. That's fair. But when presented with the opportunity to do something better, and he had his own personal reasons as to why he should, his uncle being one of them. Again, that sort of internal conflict, we're going to put you against a family member. It happens. He decides that he's going to don the costume to become Spider-Man. And what's amazing is that he has become so ubiquitous as Spider-Man, you almost have to say Peter Parker or Miles Morales. You can't just say Spider-Man because they have become so intertwined in popularity that who you're talking about does matter. She is dressed as Spider-Man, but very specifically Miles Morales. So, if you didn't know Miles, you wouldn't know if I said she's Spider-Man. You're like, what? No, that's not what Spider-Man looks like. Absolutely it is, because that's who Miles Morales is. That's what he's become. Fan favorite across the board, doesn't matter your gender, your sexual orientation, your age. Everyone loves Miles Morales.
Hashtag that's my Spider-Man.
Come on now, come on. Whip.
And I want to talk about, because we're running up against our time, good people. I want to talk specifically about this frame. Because I was very recently at a convention at the beginning of the year, and I said something about why Miles Morales is special to me is because, to me, that's the Black Spider-Man. That's how I know him, and that's how I love him, right? And someone, who shall remain nameless, specifically quoted this to me. They said, he doesn't want to be known as the Black Spider-Man. And I was like, what white person wrote this? What white person wrote this right here? And I ain't gonna call him out, but the name right there, and that's not a shade. Sometimes people don't get it right. Again, cultural humility. Sometimes people don't get it right. Because what in the hell? I have reactions to this. I have a lot of reactions to this. And Miles saying, I don't want to be known as Black. I don't want to be known as this. As if there's something wrong with that. As if there's something wrong with that. As if it is his responsibility as a melanated person to, again, remove the salience of race. And again, if somebody wants to be that, cool. And this is super problematic to me. This is super problematic to me because, again, there is this the way that we are taught to negate the devaluing of difference is by ignoring it. And that is horrible, because when you ignore that I'm Black, you don't see me, right? Not in the John Cena way. You don't see me. I love wrestling. But you don't see me if you don't see that, right? And so I think that for me, when I was confronted with this, I had no idea what this person was talking about. I was like, how did Miles Morales talk to you? He's not a real person, right? But then I was informed by my dear friend that this is the frame that he was alluding to. And so, Victor, do you remember how you felt when you first read? Oh shit!
And here's the reason why. Because I understand and agree with the sentiment that Brian was trying to get across, but might not actually land. Because, as I said before, a Black creator is what I am, not who I am. I am not necessarily creating things specifically for Black African diaspora, individuals. I'm not exclusively. Can they be included in it? Absolutely. What I think he was trying to say is that in the sense that Spider-Man does represent something that's bigger than any one race, that is kind of the idea, hence why you wear a full-bodied costume. There is no skin showing, so who I am is as wide open as anything. That is a huge concept that I think he tried to get in 5 panels and didn't quite land with the way that he said it, specifically speaking from a child's narrative, because look at how he intertwined race and ethnicity as though they're the same. They're not. That's why you can say Hispanic, and that can have a range of colors and racial identities in that. You can be Hispanic and definitely Black, right? Without being African American. Like, that is definitely true. So those are things that I think Brian was swinging, and he might have missed a little bit. So again, like you said, that humility factor of what he's trying to say. I want to be something bigger than just the Black Spider-Man, because that is a way of diminishing me being Spider-Man. When you second me by saying there's Spider-Man and then there's Black Spider-Man, well, hold up, don't do that. I'm Spider-Man, which is why, again, in the essence of Miles Morales and what he has become, at the end of Into the Spider-Verse, I am Miles Morales and I am Spider-Man, period. No delineation, no caveats, no nothing. I'm Spider-Man. I have achieved the bigger thing. Now, again, when you compare those two, you have the understanding of what somebody swung for and what somebody actually hit with. But you have to earn that. This is issue 2 of Spider-Man. We didn't have that essence with Miles yet. He hadn't earned that position yet, as opposed to after going through an entire 2-hour movie of defining yourself, figuring out who you're going to be, and deciding in the face of other people doubting you, and you go, nah, this is me. As repeated in the second movie, I'm going to do my own thing. I am Spider-Man, period. That's what Brian was trying to do, just didn't quite get in that second issue.
Okay, don't get dizzy, y'all. Don't look at the screen, because I'm going to go real fast. But one thing that I want you all, what is important about what you're saying too, is that what you're outlining is the difference between intent and impact. So whatever you intended to do has no bearing on how it impacted me. And so again, different impacts, intention may have been the same. And so I think when we're speaking from spaces of humility, I think it's important for us to understand that whether or not you meant to harm or meant to do whatever does not matter. That has no bearing on the impact. And so with these moments that we have left, I want you to talk about all of the things that you
Oh,
did.
wow. That's a lot. Okay, all right. So this is some showcases from me as a phenomenological narratologist as well as a self-publishing creator. My imprint, Vantage and House Productions, launched, it'll be 14 years in October, that this is now my full-time job. Thank you. With my intentionality with comics, I wanted to tell stories that were authentic to me, not necessarily speaking to or for a particular audience, but they were stories that I wanted to tell, and they have luckily formed themselves into a shared universe that you can follow on the basis of readership age. So we have things from all ages readership, teens, young adults, mature. We have a little something for everyone. So that way we can find you where you are as readers, and you can grow and actually see a bigger context of story if you follow the imprint. That was a big thing for me. But I found comics at a time because I didn't like to read as a kid. I didn't have any disabilities or obstacles. I just found books generally boring. The context of Huck Finn mattered nothing to a young black kid in the 90s in Columbus, Ohio. Like, I didn't care. So that all changed through pop culture when they announced in the news that Superman was going to die. Sorry, Clark. I don't know if you knew this. But they announced that Superman was going to die. As a child of pop culture, I was very interested in that. And so my mother, luckily, you know, being someone that was like, oh, you want to read something? Here, read it all. Was willing to, you know, bring me comics and get me into it. What that gave me also was an insight that says there are probably other students like me that traditional reading material just isn't it for them. Maybe we need to find something that is a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more pop cultural. So I started my brand, You Create Comics, that brings comics into the classroom. The goal is to be a bridge to learning for literacy's sake, as well as creative expression, entrepreneurship, all kinds of things, but using comic books as the backdrop for it. I mean, if you look at the idea that the top 10 movies of all time, grossing movies of all time right now, 4 of them are comic book movies. That's a lot of money, right? So when you showcase that to a kid who might not be interested in reading because they're like, books are stupid, but you go, hey, if you actually make something and you got 1% of $1 billion, that's $100 million. Would you be up for that? Would you want to get in with that? Yes? No? Show me somebody that's going to turn that down. No, you won't. Like, you lying. I'm sorry, that's 10%. Sorry, 10, yeah, sorry. I get my math. I was
about to say that math was tight.
It wasn't. It was off. Yeah, $10 million is 1%. But that's still a lot of money. So, yeah, I was going to say, I'm definitely going to take that. I'm going to sign that check. So the idea here is, through my work, I'm trying to affect people on multiple levels in terms of their reading, in terms of their literacy, in terms of their creative expression. I found that, you know, through my work, there's things that I'm talking about that are surprising to people. Through my series, The Samaritan, which I have a copy of in a very fun way that I'll explain in a minute, I'm talking about social responsibility to the environments that you're in. Everything that is in this series is a presentation of social responsibility. The first person that he encounters in this system is a child who should never be held responsible for the world that they're brought into. They have little power, little means to affect anything. But then the next person that he involves himself with is a drug user, right? And there's a measure of culpability to it. I can tell you, hey, if you give me a chance, I can save you, but maybe you're a little bit too far gone in your drug abuse. So now I have to interject in a different way. We go into domestic violence, again, which becomes a balanced conversation. Yes, there is a clear victim, but then there's an option, okay? I'm here to get in the way of your oppressor if you let me. You know, I can only help you if you let me. And that becomes, you know, or is a part of the whole conversations. Can you allow someone to have that sort of effect on you? So the whole Samaritan series is definitely, you know, something that speaks to the idea of your responsibility to the world that you exist in. How many of us have ever wanted to make change that we just didn't feel empowered to do? And here's a character that can. How would that affect you? How would you like it if that was your neighbor? You know, that type of thing.
Sorry, I was just going to the last
slide. No. You're good. One of the things I do want to share is I have a new process for my books. This is called Cartables. The idea is something that's going to relate to kids specifically, even though some of the content here is not kid-friendly. I will warn you about that. But the idea here is we want to make comics more collectible for kids. Because comics are collectibles, there's a value structure, and so kids aren't invited to go to comic shops and just get books to read anymore. So what I'm using is a trading card format that has a QR code on it. That you can scan the QR code, and you can then read the digital copy of this book, and then share it with somebody else. There is no expiration for how many times you can click this and share it. The whole goal, again, is to have kids have comics in their pocket that they can share with one another to make sure that reading is more universal for everyone. And I have a couple copies for folks, so feel free to come by and grab some after this.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you all. Thank you for making this.
No.
Hold up.
Go back.
We gotta go.
No, go back and show them that podcast. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, we got time?
There's a 30-minute gap between,
oh, my
remember?
bad. I thought it was time for us to go.
No, what, the next panel is at 6:30.
Yes.
Oh.
Like, I don't want you to take till 6:30.
Right.
Okay.
Please stop.
I was trying to be considerate.
You need to consider you.
So I have a podcast. If anybody, again, Victor and I have we have 6 episodes actually together on there. 1 3-episode series about Black Panther, 1 3-episode series about Miles Morales. And so if you were like, dang, I wish I would have talked for like 2 more hours, please.
We got that.
listen to the podcast, I have things up here, QR codes that you can scan where you can subscribe. Also follow me on all socials. And thank you so much. I'm sorry.
There we go. There it is.
My bad.
Yeah.
Thank you all again so much. We will stand here. We will meander here if you all have any questions, comments, concerns, feedback. But again, thank you so much for engaging with us in the space today, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the convention. Thank you. Yes.